We are going over all 32 teams, previewing them out for this upcoming fantasy football season. If you're here for the first time, don't make it the last time. You're here with Justin Henry, fantasy football extraordinaire and expert. Make sure you guys drop a like, drop a sub to his channel. We'll be going over every single player, every single team that's fantasy relevant, including rookies, vets, and more. And today we're going to be talking about the Atlanta Falcons, who have had a crazy offseason in a good way for this team coming into the NFC South, has a real opportunity to take this division. New coaching change. Obviously, last year was the Arthur Smith experience ending. We will not be seeing any more Arthur Smith for our fantasy teams, and this is a good thing. Raheem Morris is in charge, but more importantly for this offense and for our fantasy teams is the addition of Zach Robinson as offensive coordinator, who was helping out the Los Angeles Rams passing game. We've seen what that's been over the last couple of years. So it'll be his first time calling plays, but I think this will help out our fantasy teams. Very similar offense to what Kirk Cousins, brand new quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, ran in Minnesota. So Kirk Cousins obviously will be the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons in a mega deal, heading to the Atlanta Falcons to take over on a 4-year deal. He's 35 years old. We've seen Kirk Cousins now multiple years. He's always played his way into like back-end QB1 conversation and playing at an elite level. And now he's coming into an Atlanta team that's been desperate for good quarterback play. He finishes a QB 24 last year in 8 games. So it's like we know, and that was in 8 games total. So during that time, he was 7th in fantasy points per game, 7th. And that's with Justin Jefferson, obviously. But Kirk Cousins, he was probably on a trajectory to be at least a top 12 quarterback last season before he suffered an Achilles injury, which took him out midseason. Now, we haven't seen a lot of players that come back and bounce back from Achilles injuries. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is dealing with the same thing in New York. But Kirk Cousins does have to come back and show that he's the same quarterback that he was in Minnesota post Achilles injury. He's expected to be back full speed by this summer, but if there's any setbacks or anything, this would affect his fantasy value. For now, we have to take things as they are. And this is a quarterback who is going to have elite weapons now with Drake London, BIJAN Robinson, Kyle Pitts. This offense is set up very nicely for Kirk Cousins to continue to play at a high level. And like I mentioned, having Zach Robinson be the play caller, it's going to be a very familiar system that he ran with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. And like I said, because it's from the Sean McVay coaching tree. So about Kirk Cousins, the one thing is there's going to be plenty of opportunity for him to produce at a high level. Now, what's the big question when it comes to him? It's, can he bounce back from the injury? So I think that with the excitement, with this ATL love, this new situation, playing indoors, he might be slightly overdrafted. I could see him landing into a bunch of QB1 situations for drafts, like teams drafting him as the QB8 overall, the QB9 overall because of his upside. But I kind of think that's his ceiling, right? Due to the lack of rushing upside. I'm sure he'll throw for a ton of touchdowns. I'm sure he'll throw for a ton of yardage. And I still expect high-end QB2 production out of Kirk Cousins. I think if you can get him at a steal, it all depends on ADP. If we can get him at a steal come summertime, come July, August, I think that this is a good pick. But if we have to start taking him in the quarterback one conversation, like the 6 to 10 range, I think it's going to be a little bit of a reach. So I like Cousins. I think he'll produce for our fantasy teams. He's a nice, safe option to have. And this team also decided that they were going to invest in another quarterback in the draft just in case. Washington quarterback Michael Penix was the pick off the board for the Atlanta Falcons, the 8th pick in the draft. And a head scratcher, too. Like, you got a guy like Kirk Cousins who just signed a 4-year deal. Michael Penix, a lefty out of Washington, has a strong arm. This isn't a guy who will see the field in year 1, but if you're looking dynasty-wise, this is a play for 2, maybe 3 years down the line. It was an interesting move, but he's not a threat to Kirk Cousins. I still would take Kirk Cousins in redraft where he's supposed to go. I wouldn't really think about Penix like overtaking him unless he just played like complete trash, which I doubt Kirk Cousins will play like. So, Penix, if you were wondering if he's the guy because he was, a high draft pick, he was taken off the board, I wouldn't worry about Michael Penix taking over any snaps this season unless they're in blowout situations. I think that was a pick for future down the line, just in case you were wondering. All right, next up, let's talk running back Bijan Robinson. So Bijan Robinson finished last year as the RB9, which is kind of amazing, coming in for a rookie, but it was still a disappointment to a lot of people. I'm going to turn this off. It was still a disappointment to a lot of people who had Bijan Robinson on their fantasy teams. Why? Because you took him in the first rounds of drafts last year. It's a player I told you guys to exercise caution on. A lot of people were hyped up about it. And he might have had a bigger season if it wasn't for Arthur Smith, right? He finished last year just under 1,000 yards, 976 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, 58 catches. So he had 58 receptions, 487 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns there. He left a lot to be desired. I mean, we had a game where he came in and was quote unquote sick and didn't play damn near the whole game. So there's a ton of potential with Bijan Robinson, who was touted as a generational running back prospect. I still think he has that. He just needs consistent touches. So this year should be completely different for Bijan Robinson, with Raheem Morris saying we want to get the ball in our studs' hands. And I think we have a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. The defense has to respect the run game a lot more. Last year, there was a lot of the two-headed monster. Sometimes we would see Tyler Algier being used in the red zone. We would see Bijan being used in the red zone. A lot of question marks about how the Falcons were going to play things out. And it seems to me things are going to go as they should. Bijan should see a consistent amount of touches. And the hope and the goal is that they're still going to use him in red zone opportunities, which is where, that's where the RB1 conversation comes about. If he can be the RB1 in fantasy, it's going to be because he scores 10 to 15 touchdowns this season. So I think he'll be way more involved this year in offense. And to be honest, he has the ceiling of finishing as the best running back in fantasy football as soon as this year. He has that. Your question marks are going to be obviously Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall. You got your Saquon Barkley's up there, Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are other potential guys. But when it comes down to it, Bijan has just as good a chance as anybody to enter that, especially if he's just as involved as he was in the passing game last year with almost 60 catches. If he gets more work in the passing game, that raises his floor. The other part of that backfield, Tyler Algier, he finishes the RB36 last year, which is good, but a lot of that production was due to Arthur Smith just using both of his backs. And I think he's had 2 solid campaigns so far as a 5th-round pick. Obviously, 638 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was the 1B last year to Bijan's 1A, but it feels like it's going to be different this year. It feels like it's going to be different. I think he falls more into a reserve role this year, and he's had a great career so far, but this team is looking to go further down the line. This team is looking with Super Bowl aspirations. They got to get their stud running back as a focal part of the offense. So this year, if you're taking Tyler Algier, you're going to get him at a discount, severe discount. But it feels like flex upside is really the best case scenario for Tyler Algier this season. I'm not going to lie. He's probably going to be on waivers most of the year, but he's a good handcuff to have. I'd say he'd be an elite handcuff. If it just wasn't for the fact that Bijan was so young and durable, I would say he'd be an elite candidate as a handcuff. If anything happened to Bijan, this is a guy who could step in and be an immediate RB2. So I don't really like drafting handcuffs, but if there's one guy out there, if you had a deep enough bench or you like to draft handcuffs, I think Tyler Algier is probably in the top, portion of that group when it comes to being a backup and being able to produce fantasy-wise if something were to happen. He's a flex candidate during bye weeks at best, in my opinion, if everything stays as is, which it never does in fantasy football. All right, as far as receivers go, Drake London obviously is probably the biggest person to benefit out of the coaching change and out of the quarterback change with Kirk Cousins. He finished last year as the wide receiver 37 after getting drafted as a top 25 receiver. And he was expected to take a leap last year, but quarterback play really hurt him in his own inconsistencies. We saw Drake London. There would be weeks where he would go, with 1 or 2 catches, just inconsistent overall, which is expected out of some younger players. So last year he had 900 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think we can expect him to crack 1,000 yards a season and probably flirt with the 8 to 10 touchdown range. Kirk Cousins has a history of force feeding his number 1 targets. We saw that right last year with Justin Jefferson, the years past with Justin Jefferson. This is a perfect scenario for Drake London. So I expect him to be weekly with like a weekly floor of a wide receiver 2, especially if he's in that 1,000 to 1,200 yard conversation, somewhere around 8 to 10 touchdowns. This seems like a guy who's probably going to increase the amount of receptions he had last year as well. So I definitely think 1,000 yards is coming. Somewhere in the 80 to 90 catch range is coming. And I would assume over 8 touchdowns are coming this year for for Drake London, who should definitely be in for a career year as the only wide receiver on this team. The Falcons also brought in Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore via trade. I'm not really expecting either of them to be big players fantasy-wise for us, but Darnell Mooney has shown some potential in the past. He's had his chance to be the wide receiver, wide receiver 1 in Chicago. It didn't work. He's going to be the wide receiver 2 here in Atlanta, and Kirk Cousins does tend to throw the ball, spread the ball out at times, at least get his secondary receivers involved. It's just very inconsistent. Very inconsistent. I look at what Jordan Addison did last year at the beginning of the year, and he played really well. I don't think Darnell Mooney is up to Jordan Addison talent, but Darnell Mooney has potential to be that type of cog for this offense, a deep threat, somebody where Kirk Cousins can take shots downfield. And he'll probably be the third option in the passing game this year, behind Kyle Pitts as well. But he could have some big games. Like, I could see Darnell Mooney having a couple 100-yard games this year, maybe even a couple 2-touchdown games. Like, I think there's potential for him to have some shot plays. And then Rondale Moore really is going to be an inconsistent piece that you want nothing to deal with in fantasy. I think he'll be more of a real life cog for this team as opposed to like a consistent deep threat or receiver for this team. It's Darnell Mooney who will take advantage of this more so than Rondale Moore. And then lastly, we got to talk about Kyle Pitts, who finishes the tight end 13 last year. We've had lofty expectations for Kyle Pitts. He had a strong rookie campaign, 1,000 yards, dealt with injury his second year, was slow to start last year, and at times was even outplayed by Jonnu Smith last year. So Jonnu Smith is now in Miami. He's no longer with this team, and the coaching regime has said, we got to get Kyle Pitts involved. Obviously, Kirk Cousins and him had a little back and forth about getting more targets this year due to a number change. Even though it didn't happen, you can expect Kyle Pitts to be a lot more involved in the offense. Last year, he only had 667 yards, 3 touchdowns. And this is a player that's definitely more talented than this. It's easy to get caught up on what could have been with Kyle Pitts so far, but I think it's time to turn a new page. We have new coaching, new quarterback. Things are looking up, and we saw what TJ Hawkinson was able to do in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins knows how to get the ball to his top targets, and Kyle Pitts is definitely that. Don't forget, he's still got the speed. He's still got the size. He's still got the hands and the talent. It's been a lot of quarterback play that's been the reason why we haven't seen Kyle Pitts do exactly what we know he's capable of doing. That's it. So I think this year, we might even get Kyle Pitts at a good value just because there's a lot of hate about him. Oh, he's been an elite prospect, but he hasn't performed. That's kind of the narrative right now about Kyle Pitts, and I think he's one of the guys that we've targeted. We're like, yo, if this guy gets it, he's a generational tight end prospect. And I think, we forget that it takes tight ends sometimes a couple of years to adjust to the NFL game. He's dealt with injury, and last year coming off of an ACL injury, he needed a little bit of time early on. He wasn't even himself. So I think this year he challenges as a top 3 tight end. And if we see a full breakout, it could be a real monster season for Kyle Pitts. He was drafted to be more of a receiver than a tight end. Let's not forget that. And, when you got a guy in Arthur Smith who's making you block a lot more than you should, you're not going to have the same type of impact. I'm ready to see Kyle Pitts take off, and I think this is the year that it happens. So that does it for the Atlanta Falcons fantasy team preview. If you have other players that you wanted more information about, ask me in the comments. I'll get to them. Make sure to check out the other team previews. We're going through all 32 teams. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.